Good afternoon, Justice Robinson.
Good afternoon, sir.
Congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you.
And I was hoping to have this conversation, you and I, last week, but I think
Sure.
between the phone calls and the texts and the high technology that we have, I think the time and the place got messed up.
Agreed. Agreed.
In the process, I'm sure you were waiting somewhere and I was waiting somewhere else, but here we are. That's all that matters.
That's
And I'm
right.
glad to have the opportunity to have this conversation with you,
Thank you.
though in a public forum, but regardless of that. And just a few questions that I've also have in mind listening to the conversation so far. Do you feel that the judicial branch should have a role, a say, in the legislative process?
No. Well, it depends. It depends. There are some things that directly affect the judicial branch, and so we do need to have a part of say in that. For example, we're talking about appropriations now. The branch should definitely have a role in that. But if you're talking about some other kind of a social concern thing, then we should not. We are judges, not legislators.
Thank you. Yes, what I was referring to is legislation in itself, in its purity, not in terms of from a dollar and cents, not from an economic point of view. And as Representative Walker so appropriately said, that given the fact that we are where we are, obviously we are concerned about who are we going to be able to get to the judicial branch, but that's not the discussion here.
Right.
In terms of your input in legislation as it goes through the various channels in this building.
Generally, I would say no. If it impacts the judicial branch, yes.
Could you elaborate on the impact on the judicial branch? Where would you see your role, not necessarily you, but the judicial branch in its impact in legislation, that it will impact the judicial branch?
I think I understand your question. Let's say we're talking about a non-core function, probation or victims advocate or something like that. If it directly affected judicial, whatever that legislation is, I think judicial should have a say-so, or else you're not going to know how that impacts the judicial branch. But if it's, should we have a victims advocate at all, then no, I don't think that is the role of the judicial branch, so we shouldn't have any impact. So it's going to be on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. Now, if you feel that the legislation that is being discussed, moving in one direction or another, is something in which you, A, personally, and B, the judicial branch would have insight, would have additional knowledge, information, which we, citizen legislators, may or may not have. Do you feel that it is a role for you to educate us, inform us, and walk us through the process?
Let me take the one about personally. Just because I'm a judge doesn't mean I can't talk to my legislator. I mean, that would be a nightmare scenario. I'm not sure I'd want to be a judge if it just disconnected me from that possibility. So I always feel I can speak to my representative or my senator just about on anything except a pending case. The branch, once again, I really have to know what scenario is that you're talking about before I could say whether the judicial branch should be involved in it. Because if it doesn't involve a judicial function, I just don't know how we should be there.
Thank you. Well, looking at the questionnaire that you answered for us, I'm looking at question number 5, where we talk about the Connecticut law and the federal law. And are we on the same questionnaire?
Yes.
So, yeah, great. So if the threshold in that particular situation, in that particular case, adequately meets the federal requirements, but not necessarily or does not meet the standard of our state, what would your thoughts and what would your views be in that situation?
Well, as you know, one of the things that a justice uses or a judge uses is precedent. And we have a case, State versus Geisler, and we have the Geisler factors to determine whether the state of Connecticut has the same level of of protection. Sometimes we have a higher level of protection that's already been determined by Geisler, and so I would be bound by that precedent.
Thank you, thank you. And, in going to question number 7, which is about when you disqualify yourself or recuse yourself. In the
Yes.
years you have served on the bench so far, can you recall where you were sitting on the case when you really should have recused yourself?
I don't recall, if I understand your question, I don't think there has been a case where I should have recused myself and didn't. I don't think that exists. I've been very careful with my recusals, and quite frankly, when I thought that reasonable minds could disagree on it, chances are I would recuse.
And this is more of a, which would have been my question to you had we had the opportunity. But I want now, obviously, the only opportunity I have.
Yes.
What would you consider, if looking at yourself in the mirror, your greatest strengths, and perhaps more important, your greatest weakness?
Sometimes those can be the same thing. I really try to think matters out before I even publicly, by publicly outside my body, address them to other people. At the same token, I'm always willing to listen to make sure that I understand the entire picture. When I draft an opinion, I always tell my other justices, or even one in the appellate court, look, this is how I feel about this. If you can persuade me to go otherwise, then I need to know. Let's have this conversation. So my mind isn't made up, quite frankly, until the very end. There's sometimes I feel very strongly about it and think there's very little chance you're going to convince me. There's other times when I think, I may not have this right. And I do that not only with my fellow judges. My permanent clerk is here, and he has carte blanche to tell me, Judge, I think you're wrong. I need that pushback. I don't like to have a yes person in my chamber, because that does me no value whatsoever. I can be by there and write the opinion myself and be done with it. But I'm not a perfect being, and I acknowledge that. And so I'm willing to listen to what others have to say, and if they can convince me, then fine.
So following that train of thought, if there was an opinion that you felt you had to write, which unfortunately did not go,
Yes.
along with
Mhm.
the general opinion of the bench on that day, on that subject matter, or your own counsel that you're talking about that says, Judge, you got it wrong here.
Yeah.
Are you the kind of a person that can look back at that and say, you know what, I may have got this wrong, and let me listen to what others are saying, and then make the necessary adjustments? Do you have that in you?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to congratulate you on the nomination today.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to this moving forward through the process.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations.